Hi everybody, my name is Evan, this is Co-Creative Astrology, and today we're going to look a little bit at Uranus in Gemini, specifically if you have planets in the sign of Gemini, but this is also relevant if you have planets in the mutable sign, so that would be in Gemini and opposite to Gemini is Sagittarius, or if you have planets in Pisces or in Virgo. So this is going to be particularly pertinent for you because this means that Uranus is either going to be making a conjunction to those planets in your chart or an opposition. If you have planets in Sagittarius, you'll be getting the opposition. If you have planets in Virgo or in Pisces, you'll be getting the square from Uranus. So definitely if you want to look ahead, I have the timestamps below here for each of the different planets and what that means in terms of getting a transit from Uranus, what could potentially be showing up in your world. Although of course Uranus is a very the planet of change and surprises, so there's no telling exactly to be able to predict obviously what is going on, especially though pay attention to the house that it's in. I'm not going to go through all of that today, but there's plenty of astrologers who focus on that in terms of like giving you an idea of what can be expected in terms of this transit. But I thought it would be good to actually talk about what it means if we have a planet in these signs and what it means to receive a transit from Uranus. Before I move on, I just want to mention real quickly that I have a class currently available called By the Moon, the intuitive guide to understanding your birth chart. And I just put this together as a way for folks to have a much more intimate connection with their own birth chart through learning how to actually track the moon's transits against your own personal chart. And we'll also go through how to understand the natural rhythm and flow of your own birth chart, because we each have our own unique way that we experience transits. And it's a very important thing to understand about our chart because this is essentially how we are constantly interfacing with life. So if you're curious about that, it is made for anyone who's completely new to astrology. And actually I have a free ebook right now that is part of the class itself. So you get a whole taste of the first lesson plus one of the video tutorials. So if you're completely new to astrology, this is actually a really good tutorial. It's kind of like my basic intro into understanding how to cast a chart using free or very low cost software, and also like what you're even looking at, how to do that from the very basic level. So if you're completely new, definitely get the freebie ebook, and that can get you started and maybe understanding if this is the class for you. And it's also for folks who are more advanced but want a more like an intuitive approach to what you're doing here and a way to actually engage with the planets beyond just studying what they mean, right? There's so many more ways that we can actively engage with the planets before we even understand fully this system. And when we do almost get into this mode of trying to study different types of astrology or take so many different input, so much different information, right? It becomes sort of like, okay, but what's my personal relationship to that? So I created this class specifically so that folks can begin understanding pathways to practice astrology more in this way where you're developing your own personal connection with your own birth chart and with the planets. And so, yeah, it's really exciting. It's out there again. It's called By the Moon. All the information about it is in the description box as well. So let's just chat a little bit about the time frame here of what we're looking at. So today is July 7th, and that is when Uranus has moved in this morning into the sign of Gemini, which for me personally, this was kind of a wild ride as we lost power early this morning and then lost cell service and went into town. There's been a lot of flooding in my area. And the place that had, power and everything, literally as I was sitting there, I saw a transformer blow up and a bunch of smoke come out of it. And I was like, okay, this is Uranus in Gemini. Surprises, right? Like very unexpected events happening. So it's already, I feel like, showing itself right away, at least for me personally. And I'm sure that we'll hear more stories from how it's affecting different people as this week goes on. It's always good when a planet first ingresses into a new sign to pay attention for the first week or so, right? To really get kind of key understanding of what the flavor of this particular transit might be. Always at the points of ingress and the points when the planet stations retrograde or direct. It's kind of like those exclamation point moments for these longer transits, because ultimately Uranus spends about 8 years cumulatively in each sign when it travels through. So we have not had Uranus in this sign since 84 years ago. So it's definitely a big deal. I'm sure all of you know, a lot of astrologers are talking about this. Taurus. And Gemini is a sign that is an air sign, right? And this is ruled by Mercury. So think about the last 8 years, right, where Uranus was moving through Taurus. This is fixed Earth energy. So it just means that this planet, right, which wants to be quickly moving, which wants to create lots of change, that's very, very different than the sign of Taurus, which is very much about creating consistency and stability, right? Especially earthly stability. So the flavor, essentially, of the planet moving through the sign of Taurus is very different than what it will be moving through Gemini, because it's kind of like with being Mercury ruled, and Uranus is actually considered the higher octave of Mercury, sort of like these two signs, or like the planet with this sign and with the ruling planet of that sign, they get along more, right? Like they're more compatible with each other. So it's almost like, okay, think of moving through sludge, right? Like if you're like a fast moving body or planet, like you're trying to move through earth that's fixed in one place, moving through stone essentially, and then having to move into a new sign that's an air sign, right? And then suddenly it's like, wow, I'm in line, like I'm totally aligned with this other air sign that's ruled by the planet Mercury, that's very swift. So the energy is going to be a lot faster in terms of the changes that we're going to be seeing, a lot more rapid changes. So if you've been feeling stagnancy in your life in certain areas, it's just going to pick up. We're all going to see collectively just a lot of swift changes in terms of comparing it to the last 7 or 8 years, right, where Uranus has been moving through Taurus. And I want to mention too, so every time a planet that has a longer cycle like this, and the ones who have shorter ones too, we know that they each go through retrograde cycles, right? So they will move back. So Uranus is actually going to be staying in the sign of Gemini this year for about 4 months, and then is moving back into the sign of Taurus for, let's see, I have the dates on that. It moves back in for 5 months. So starting in November through April of 2026, it will be back into Taurus. So for those of you who have planets in late degrees of Taurus, you are still going through this transit as well. And anyone who has planets in the late degrees of the fixed signs in general. So that would be Taurus, like I said, Scorpio, Leo, or Aquarius. So if you have planets within, like, I would say 23 to the 29 degree of that sign, you're going to be still working with that Uranus energy when it comes to that particular planet. So this isn't a video just for folks who are experiencing, who have planets in Gemini or in the mutable signs, but also still applicable for folks who have planets in the late degrees of the fixed signs. So Uranus moves fully into Gemini on April 25th of next year, and then will stay there until 2033. It'll go into Cancer for a short time, then come back, and then finally leave in 2023, I believe in May. So that's kind of a time frame to keep in mind. And for those of you, again, who have planets in late degrees of the fixed signs, this is still applicable to you. And I will say this is really for those of you who have, I would say, up to around planets up to around 6 degrees of Gemini or the mutable signs. This is something you'll want to pay attention to, because this transit's going to start happening for you presently. For those of you who have planets in later degrees of Gemini, you might not feel the impact of this until later. Although with Uranus moving into this particular sign, you might begin to have some sort of inkling around what the transit could be, since they're in the same sign. But the actual, events or whatever that could be more clear in terms of what this means for you might not actually happen until you get closer in terms of the transit. And with transit timing, I usually use an orb of 5 degrees when I'm doing outer planetary transits and transits in general. I find that 5 degree mark, and this is coming from archetypal astrology and from my teacher and my own practice, when planets come into that degree that are transiting your personal chart, there is always usually some sort of inkling or something that comes to the surface that sort of gives an insight or a sort of window view into what this transit might be about for you. So definitely pay attention once the planet of Uranus moves into that 5-degree zone of your birth chart, the planet in your birth chart. And the way that transits work is it's sort of like a wave, right? So when they first enter, it's like, okay, I'm feeling maybe something, right? And once it gets closer, especially within like around 2 degrees or 1 degree, it's almost like you're so enmeshed with the energy, right? It's almost all around you. It's so present that it's difficult to really discern what to make of it, right? It's almost like too much in the field. And then once the transit's beginning to cycle out, when it's leaving, right, which is for folks who have planets in late degrees of Taurus or the fixed signs, you might be feeling this now, where it's moments of integration that are starting to come forward, where you're able to look back and be like, okay, I can see what this transit was all about, right? And like why exactly the things played out the way that they did, and what I meant to learn from the situation. But when we're really in the heat of the transit, it can be difficult to understand fully what it is that we are meant to be doing with it, right? We're just supposed to be like living through it essentially. But of course we can be aware and have consciousness as we're going through it. And that gives us, of course, that's why we practice astrology, right? It's like we understand there's something going on here, and I can actively do my best to participate with it. Though, of course, I will say Uranus is our planet of liberation. Like everything that it's doing is in service of our personal liberation or collective liberation, ultimately freedom, right? Which is not always aligned with what is status quo, with what we're familiar with what we're comfortable with. So it can be a very uncomfortable, unsettling energy because it comes in swiftly. We have these surprise events that can happen, but ultimately what it is wanting to do for us is to shake up the places where we are a little bit too stagnant, right? Where we're not able to see things in ways that are actually supportive to us or could be supportive of our own freedom. And this is Gemini energy. With Uranus and Gemini, this is all about the mind, right? This is a Mercury ruled planet. So we're looking at Mercury, like all things communication, thinking about what does it mean then if there's disruptions, right, in terms of how we're communicating, brand new ideas. Uranus is a future thinking planet. So this is very much the energy of like genius ideas coming through, and a lot of them with that Gemini energy too, because it's just sort of like a barrage of information coming at us from every direction. So using discernment at this time is going to be very important for all of us, and understanding where our sources are coming from, all of that sort of stuff, because it's probably going to be a lot happening in terms of information that we are having thrown at us at any moment in time. And with that also, like the idea of how we are taking in this information in our physical body, we need to pay attention to. Uranus is kind of a zingy energy. It has that electric quality. And with it being in the mind, I can imagine, especially if you're having transits from Uranus to your personal chart, and we're all experiencing this energy to some degree. We all have Uranus moving through a certain house, right? That it's going to be good for us to find ways to ground and to find our stability in some way, shape, or form as all of this like more rapid pace energy comes forth. So find your practices that really support that. And it's not just Uranus that has moved into a more fast moving sign, right? We have all of the outer planets now with Neptune and Saturn, and also Pluto. Pluto's in an air sign, and Saturn and Neptune are in a fire sign. So it's just a very different type of speed, right? Like we're all just kind of thrust now into this time period where we're moving from a lot of time with these outer planets spending in water and earth into a time of more fire and air. So it definitely should be showing around us elementally, right, in that difference, the different quality where that energy, air and fire, moves a lot faster than earth and water. So all of us need to kind of prepare ourselves for more swift moving energy, which some folks might be really excited about that and have been feeling very ready for that type of energy, and sort of struggling against all of that water and earth energy pushing against it. So this kind of up in the pace might feel good to some people, and for other folks might feel really, burnout type of energy. And Uranus can affect the nervous system. It can really bring us to those places of burnout if we're not careful in reconnecting with our physical body in a way that can ground us. Just in general, I think the world that we are going to be left left with after Uranus moves through Gemini is going to look quite different, even just our day-to-day lives. But with that, I just want to go ahead and begin looking at what this means for you for each specific planet if you have one of these planets in Gemini or in the mutable signs. And like I said, this also applies if you have these planets in the late degrees, like about 23 or higher in Taurus or in the other fixed signs, Scorpio, Leo, or Aquarius. So you can look for that as well to maybe give you an idea of what you have been going through, what this transit has been like, how maybe you're starting to wrap up this particular transit. So go ahead, like I said, the timestamps are in the description box if you want to jump ahead. And yeah. All right, for those who have Sun in Gemini, or if you have the Sun in Sagittarius, in Virgo, or in Pisces, this is going to be affecting you. Uranus is going to be giving you a transit either by conjunction, opposition, or in a square formation. So for those of you who have the Sun here, Sun energy, when it comes to Uranus transiting the Sun, right? This is Uranus, the planet of disruption, of changes, and the Sun being your identity, right? The things that you would say, this is me. And really what can happen here is kind of, I would say, ego degradation, moments of ego loss, a time period where the way that you thought or the things you identified with can really deeply change. You might find yourself in this kind of place of like, I don't know who I am anymore necessarily, or have big events happen or new information come through that makes you reconsider the things that you identify with, or like paths that you have been on. You know, the Sun is really our hero's journey. It is about our life's purpose, that long journey that we take over our whole lives. We're always kind of becoming this part of us. And so if a transit, right, happens here, especially Uranus, this is kind of very big surprises coming through. And with it being in Gemini, can imagine that could have to do also with information. Like maybe you read something and it totally changes your perspective to the point that you cannot go back, right? Like I cannot unsee what I just saw. It's totally changing my identity. I personally see Uranus transits to the Sun being one that can provoke spiritual awakening if that's a path that you believe that you're on or that you could be on. Definitely moments of that, because it can bring about these deep questionings of who am I, right? And bringing that to the surface. So if you have Uranus transiting your Sun, definitely be prepared to have these moments of revelation going on that are going to have you kind of questioning your own identity and bringing you to new places, because ultimately what Uranus wants to do here is bring more freedom to you, right, in your path forward, where if anything in terms of how you've identified in your life thus far has gotten a little bit rigid, right, or you just haven't questioned it. You've never questioned that part of yourself before. Uranus is here to kind of be like, hey, let's think about this in a brand new way, one that maybe you've never even considered, almost opening up an entire new world for you to explore and think like, oh, I actually don't have to be this person, right? I don't have to be any way at all. And it can really give you a brand new look at life. So having Uranus transit the Sun is a pretty wild experience. I personally have been having this transit and it has absolutely changed my life completely in terms of all things around identity. And it takes a while, I would say, until we get to that integration period to start to even understand what it is that, you know, has been the reasoning for this, or why, where we're going to land, right? Like how am I going to land after this transit? So, yeah, but it's a wild ride. It's very interesting. Keep your mind open, right? Like allow the changes to come. The more that we fight against Uranus energy, the more difficult it is to deal with the different transits that it brings, because it's kind of like, it is what it is, right? Like no matter how the swift changes are showing up for us, no matter how dramatic, and it will be different for every single person. I want to emphasize this too, because with astrology, not everyone experiences transits the same way. So if you have a Uranus transiting any planet in your chart, if it depends on your context, right? Like not everyone's going to have a really, really difficult, challenging event that life-changing to the point that like everything's disrupted, right? It might honestly just be like, oh, I had a revelation because of a conversation that I had with someone, to the point that is what really shifted my perspective to where things are just not the same anymore for me. It really depends on the context of your life. So someone who's maybe coming from like, think of someone who grew up in a very protected and shielded environment, right? Having Uranus transit the sun might be a breaking out of all of those traditional beliefs, right? And what they thought about who they were, how they identified, versus someone who grew up in a very like open environment where that's totally normal, like they're just wild and free already. Having Uranus come through and transit their sun might be one where it transforms them into a person who now is more like, oh, I'm actually seeking some more stability in my life, right? It's all about what is normal in your life right now and how you are identifying with the sun. And in your journey, how you see it progressing forward, what would you consider to be consistent or normal, right? And Uranus wants to come in there and shake that up and make sure that that's still true for you, right? Like make sure that you're giving yourself the freedom and that you feel that lightness, right? Like that you're not becoming stuck in some way. So for those of you who have the moon in Gemini or in Sagittarius, so the moon in Gemini, you'll be getting the conjunction from Uranus. If it's in Sagittarius, you'll be getting the opposition. Or if you have the moon in Virgo or in Pisces, you'll be getting the square from Uranus. So for those of you with getting this particular transit to your moon from Uranus, we can expect the moon is our emotional body, right? And Uranus is like quick moving energy, spontaneous changes, right? So it might be a time of a lot of what would feel emotionally destabilizing, or just a lot of emotions happening, moving through your body at a pace and a rate that you haven't really maybe experienced before. And it's all essentially in service to bringing more freedom, right? Emotional freedom. It's really the aspect of having a free spirit, because if we think about the energy of the moon is also children, right? And it's also like our inner child if we don't have children, and it's everyone's inner child. So if we think about Uranus with that, it's a very playful energy, a little bit like think of like a trickster child, just wanting to kind of enjoy that childlike uniqueness, curiosity, all of that coming together with that moon placement. So you might find yourself kind of more lighthearted a little bit, but also experiencing a bit of this tumultuous emotional energy with Uranus there that's a little bit unexpected by others around you. It could also provoke a bit of like freeing energy when it comes to your inner child. So if there's been ways that you've been stuck in certain patterns and woundedness since you were young, right? This is a beautiful opportunity with Uranus transiting your moon to have a lot of potential opportunities for healing, especially in the moments when you realize that you're being activated in those old wounded parts. If you can like turn your perspective to one of being more understanding and of curiosity, right? Of like, what is this trying to show me right now? How can I actually, integrate this? What is this trying to liberate within me? Getting to that point first of questioning in that way when we have big upsets emotionally, to really get to that point of like, okay, if Uranus is here to support me in terms of bringing me more freedom, how is that playing out in this moment that feels really uncomfortable when it comes to bringing up these issues from the past? The moon is also about our past, right? And about families. It's about our most intimate connections. So there could be disruption in terms of these things. It's also like the home. So for those who get Uranus transits to the moon, it can bring disruptions in terms of the home. But ultimately, again, trying to bring us to this place of having more freedom. So anywhere that we have restricted ourselves in terms of these things in our lives, right? It wants to come in and bring that new like life-giving, generating energy through somewhat disruptive form, right? And with the moon being so connected to intuition as well, you might just find yourself like spontaneously receiving messages or intuitive hits in ways that you've never experienced before, or even physically, like through the body, because the moon can be about our body. So sort of receiving information about your environment or about people in ways that you've never experienced before, that can lead you to some spontaneous opportunities for gaining more freedom, right, in your own personal life. And then one last thing I'll say about this is because this is our most intimate connections and because Uranus is the planet of rebellion, there might be a way that you find yourself wanting to rebel, right, against certain people who you've had intimate bonds with, whether that's like blood family. It's almost like your perspective could change in such a way that it feels like necessary for you to move against it, right? Like to break out of what has been normal in terms of those situations, or you're just needing freedom in a way that you haven't in the past. This kind of like this energy of just needing to move, right? Needing things to deeply change in those intimate relationships. So that's something that could be expected as well with Uranus transiting the moon. Let's move on to Mercury though. So if you have Mercury in Gemini, you'll be getting the conjunction. If you have Mercury in Sagittarius, you'll be getting the opposition from Uranus. Or if you have Mercury in Virgo or in Pisces, you'll be getting a square from Uranus. So this is really interesting because Mercury already rules the sign of Gemini, right? And then I said earlier, Uranus is considered often the higher octave of Mercury. So it's almost like you have a triple threat of Mercury, right? It's like showing up 3 times just in that one aspect, which means things are going to get a lot faster for you, and particularly as it relates to your mental, how you receive messages mentally, right? Like how you're communicating with other people, what your daily world looks like in terms of how you're getting around in the world, and yeah, how you are expressing yourself and the information you're sharing with others in this life. You could be, if you're someone who likes to write, or you might become very prolific in the things you're writing, or this is very much like genius energy too. Uranus can be kind of genius energy. So pay attention to your ideas, right? Like new ideas might just be dropping in rapid fire throughout this time period. And that could lead, like I said, sometimes Uranus energy can lead a little bit to burnout because it's so much happening, right? Or you just feel the inspiration a lot. I consider Uranus energy kind of pretty inspiring at times. And so the two of these coming together, you might just find like, whoa, almost overwhelm of information. I know when I had Uranus transiting my Mercury, I've had a difficult time sleeping at night a lot. I was very much an insomniac during that time period because it was constantly like new ideas coming around like the things I was working on, and also around my own personal life, and just like needing to get stuff out of my system through communicating in some way. A lot of it was, I think I started my own like writing practice at that time. So it's definitely a very generative time for folks, and one that can be quite illuminating because this is Uranus energy, right? It's bringing completely new ideas to you that you've never experienced before. And Mercury is not just a planet that is about expressing, right? It's about listening. So, and teachers too. So you might find yourself involved with finding new teachers, right, who are giving you information that you've never heard before, that is totally turning your world upside down and giving you a whole new perspective about your own life and what you want to do moving forward, right? Like how you want to actually express yourself moving forward because of whatever information is presented to you. So it's very interesting. I would say for those of you who have Mercury, expect like a lot of very fascinating ideas to be coming to you, to be a lot more inspired, and to just, for things to be running through. So just be careful with that air energy. One good practice I would actually say, I feel like could be utilizing breath work. I'm going to say this too for folks who have Mars in this sign, just because it's that active thing. But I think for everybody at this time, figuring out a breathwork practice and determining how that can work for you could be supportive, because it's really like utilizing the element of air, right? And controlling it in a way and moving it through the body in a more stable way, and finding that path to help you kind of ground more with that air energy would be really important. But yeah, Mercury being about the mind too, there might just be ways that if you've had certain looping thoughts or certain ways that you've perceived things, right, that might be really changing, or like your whole perspectives, or the things, the actual infrastructure of your own mind, right, the foundations of your mind could be completely radically shifted, uprooted. The things that have really felt stuck in there in terms of how you perceive life and how you express what you perceive, right? That's very much Gemini, and that's very much Mercury. So get ready. All right, and for those of you who have Venus in Gemini or who have Venus in Sagittarius, if you have Venus in Sagittarius, you'll get the opposition from Uranus. If you have Venus in Virgo or in Pisces, you'll be getting the square. So if you have Venus in these signs and are receiving a transit from Uranus, you can expect a lot with the energy of Uranus coming through. This is like big changes, right? Shifts in how you're perceiving things with it being in Gemini. So this is all concerned then with Venus, with relationships, with your social circles, with partnerships, with your creativity, right? It's a very significant moment for you to have a completely new way that you might even engage with how you create and what you're interested in creating in terms of like in an artistic way. And we're all artists in some way. It's a very beneficial time in terms of that. If you're an artist, a deeply inspiring time. And so definitely take advantage of that if you can. Like you might find yourself working with new mediums that you've never worked with before and just finding it being incredibly opening in terms of your creative practice. Like if you're someone who's a writer, right? Like it's very Gemini energy. If you're someone who only works with your hands, right? Suddenly it's like, oh, I want to try this specific skill, or actually I'm going to go like full on out and like actually do something completely different that's bringing out an artistic side of me that I never would have experienced otherwise, right? Or moving from like doing only painting on canvases and then suddenly you're going to start making digital art, just like big transitions, or not even transitions, but just exploring. It's such explorative energy, especially with it being in Gemini, and Gemini is such a curious sign and interested in trying new things. It's mutable energy, right? It's not like needing to get stuck in any one place. So for that, it's all of like those of you who are watching already have your Venus sign in a mutable sign, so this might be familiar to you. But with Uranus coming in, it's almost adding a whole new level of that energy coming through. So definitely take advantage of what you're experiencing in terms of your relationship to creativity. And also, this is obviously like most people know Venus in terms of relationships. So this could be a time, a lot of people fear this transit in terms of Uranus transiting your Venus, because it's like considered the way like relationships might end, right? The way I really look at it is, yes, that could happen, but only for relationships where there's not actually room for growth, like where there's not actually room for change. The whole point of Uranus in like transiting certain planets, right, is it's trying to offer liberation. It wants freedom. So you might really find like, okay, I don't feel like I have enough freedom in this particular relationship. And if the relationship isn't built in such a way where that's an option, or where you can really give that to one another, then yes, there might be a break in the relationship. Like if there's not space for the transformations or the changes to occur, then that's very possible. Uranus can just be that like itchy feet energy of like, I have to do something different. I have to go. And it's rebellious too. So it is true. This might be bringing this quality to your relationships. It might just be difficult to continue in certain relationships that you are in, or you might find yourself, aside from relationships, like in your social circle, you might really find that you have a lot of different types of friends by the end of this transit, or people have really gone in and out. You've had really interesting connections with all sorts of people. Uranus with Venus is very much like having a love for people who are just very quirky and unique and like thinking on a different level than everyone else. So it could be that these people are kind of coming into your life, or you're finding yourself attracted to different types of people, or like wanting to connect more with those types of folks. So let's move on to Mars. If you have Mars in Gemini, you're getting the conjunction from Uranus. If you have Mars in Sagittarius, you'll be getting the opposition. If you have Mars in Virgo or in Pisces, you'll be getting the square from Uranus. So for this particular aspect, Mars is our life force, right? And it's also how we fight and like the way that we experience aggression or conflict in our lives. It's a lot of our motivation, like how we want to take action in our lives, period. And so with Uranus coming coming in, there can be this way that you suddenly are feeling inspired to take more risks in your life, right? Like feeling that it's actually possible. Like, okay, I think I'm not interested in just standing still anymore, right? Like I'm ready to actually jump on the next opportunity. And this is partly because, well, Mars is already a very forward moving planet, but then Uranus is like such quick and fast energy. So it's almost like putting fast and fast together, right? And they just want to like run and sprint forward. And you might find, as this is Gemini energy, that you might have a ton of new ideas coming through and you want to act on them very, very quickly. And it might be a little bit frustrating if you find yourself unable to do that like immediately, or the people in your life might just be like, whoa, you got to slow down. Like I can't keep up with you. And that might feel a little bit annoying, right? Like Mars can tend to get, it's like heated energy. It can get a little agitated if it has to stand still. So you can think about those two planets coming together, and this might just be a time period where you are ready to go on the next thing, right? Uranus is also that liberation energy. So if you have felt really stuck in terms of being able to express your anger, for example, this might be a way that you actually find a lot of freedom in being able to express yourself and express your rage, express that passion as well, anything related to Mars, right? And even like expressing your acting, right? Acting on your passions, acting on your anger, hopefully from a place of being able to step back and also consider the implications of those actions, or if it's truly in alignment with how you want to be. But for those who have suppressed that particular emotion, right, for long periods of time, Uranus might be coming in to sort of like offer opportunities through unexpected events or just things that are very destabilizing, and then wanting to bring that to the surface to give you more opportunity for that to be free, to be expressed, to be able to move forward, so that you're not so stuck in terms of holding on to that anger, right, or holding on to that expression, holding on to that the motivation inside of you, the fire inside of you, right, that really wants to take action in your life. So for those who have been struggling with that, we can look at Uranus transits that might be very uncomfortable, right? But a Uranus transit coming through there ultimately could bring a lot of potential liberation to parts of you that have felt really like tamped down or unable to fully engage with your own inner fire. So this could be a very inspiring time for you, and a very motivating time, surprising time in terms of the actions that you're willing to take that maybe you haven't been in the past. And one last thing I will say is that Mars with Uranus can sometimes be like surprise accidents, and we can just think of that in terms of, because they are both so quick moving, right? And it's almost like tripping over yourself if we're not looking where we're going, because we're just like so focused on charging ahead. So definitely be careful. Like you might be inspired to do certain things, physical things, right, that you never have before in the past. Like suddenly you're like becoming a rock climber, or just like doing these really interesting new things physically, right? But that could bring potential accidents if you're not actually being a little bit more careful about how you're going about that. So just take that into mind. Obviously not everyone who has this transit is going to get in an accident, but it's just important to remember that these are things. And one thing I'm thinking about with Uranus with Mars as well is something that could be helpful, since this is air energy, is to start some kind of a breathwork practice. Just thinking about the way that it can offer opportunity of control, but using the physical body and bringing in that air element as a way to create some more stability, because this is a very hot energy coming together, right? And very quick moving. And so using breathwork as a way to actually like calm the body and find more inner stability and harmony is definitely something I would recommend during this transit. All right, for folks who have Jupiter in Gemini, you're getting the conjunction from Uranus, or if you have Jupiter in Sagittarius, you'll get the opposition, or if you have Jupiter in Virgo or in Pisces, you'll be getting the square from Uranus. So if you're experiencing this transit, we can look to Jupiter, who is our planet of growth, right? The ways that we experience that in our own life, combined with the energy of Uranus, which is also one that is very forward thinking, right? Which is very much aligned with that energy of growth. And so it's almost almost something that can bring a lot of peak experiences for us. And this can be very pertinent too for folks who would consider themselves spiritual or just having these sorts of experiences. It can bring a lot of those like heightened moments of deeper connection or higher connection, right, to things beyond this world, but it's not necessarily offering the integration point. So because this energy almost is like so uplifting, right, like we think of the quality of Jupiter as bringing that upliftment. It's bringing the good things of life, but then Uranus is almost taking it to an even bigger extreme that sometimes it can be difficult to kind of like come back down to earth, right? A lot of the planets I've already talked about having conjunctions from Uranus can bring this quality, especially with it being in an air sign where it's difficult to feel grounded. But particularly with Jupiter and Uranus, I would just say if you're having these like huge peak moments, right, where you're just like feeling out of this world, right, and whatever it is that you're experiencing, just make sure you're giving yourself the time to integrate those experiences, because there's only a certain amount of peak experiences that we can have before it starts to be like, okay, but what's going on in my physical life truly? Like, how is that actually even like being a part of that, right? Like, what does this mean in terms of my day-to-day? So just keep in mind that part of it. It's a very like eye-opening transit and very generative in terms of having these incredible uplifting experiences. And Jupiter is a planet of good fortune, right? And it is a planet that can bring blessings. So you might just have these kind of like miraculous things going on that are very unexpected through this transit. With Jupiter also being a planet that's associated with our beliefs, right? Our belief systems. Having Uranus come through and, you know, having a transit of Uranus onto your Jupiter can really bring a complete change, radical transformation when it comes to your belief systems. So ultimately we all know, right, like our beliefs make up so much about what happens in the world around us, right? And how we experience life. So having this transit can deeply change. By the end of it, you might turn around and be like, whoa, like I have very, very different ideas about who I am in this world and how this world even functions, right? Like, and all of that because of Uranus moving through and just kind of like turning things upside down on its head. I personally associate Uranus with the energy of like the Hanged Man, which can bring a lot of epiphanies. So you might just find it's like, wow, like boom, 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 right? I'm having all these new ideas and these new thoughts coming through, or I'm taking in information from people who are new teachers, right? Or gurus, that's very much Jupiter energy, who are taking me to new levels of understanding in the mind and how I can actually work with my mind, right? And in a way that is completely transforming the framework of my own belief systems. So this could be a very generative transit if you are able to actually also integrate the things that you are learning and the ways that you are changing. So just be mindful that you're not, you know, burning the candle at both ends with this transit when you're experiencing those heightened moments, but it can be really, really powerful and enjoyable transit if you're getting this. All right, and finally, we're looking at Saturn. So if you have Saturn in Gemini, or you'll get the conjunction from Uranus. If you have Saturn in Sagittarius, you'll be getting the opposition. And if you have Saturn in Virgo or in Pisces, you'll be getting the square from Uranus. So Saturn energy and Uranus energy are really essentially the most opposite energies possible from two planets. So this transit can bring a lot of discomfort, a lot of moments of just back and forth, right? Saturn really wants stability. It wants tradition. It's focused on the past, right? Where Uranus is very future thinking. It wants freedom at all costs, right? It's not concerned with building any kind of foundations. It's concerned with breaking you free of any foundations that are clearly not working for you. So it's actually, it can be supportive, right? Where it's like, it's testing the foundations, right? It's really, really like those stress tests that happen to make sure that whatever you're investing in long term is truly going to be able to stand this type of liberation pressing up against it. Like, yeah, but are you sure like this new idea isn't going to make that crumble, right? Are you sure that this new perspective you've never heard of isn't going to flip that foundation up on its head, right? There might be a lot of this push and pull going on in terms of how you're feeling of like, I want to just settle down. No, I want to be free and try this whole new life over here. Like, I want to go travel. No, I want to stay at home. Just like a lot of completely opposing experiences within you during this, which can cause a lot of just like feeling unsettled, right? And like almost having a little bit of constant back and forth within the self, just because of how different these two energies are. It's not always really very possible to create a complete harmony between the two, but it's really important. I mean, I'm just saying that I think it's difficult. Let me know in the comments if you have this in your birth chart, or how you work with this energy in particularly. I'm sure other people who are experiencing this transit would love to know. But it is important to find ways to give them both their space, right? Like, okay, so if I'm not going to move across the country or like the world somewhere else, maybe I find ways to give myself freedom, right? That really like satisfies that Uranian impulse for complete radical change, while keeping some sense of stability. So finding a way to like keep them both satisfied in a certain way could really help you out throughout this transit. With this transit, it's really going to be about learning what are the highest qualities of each of these things, right? Like if Uranus is also associated with like youth, and Saturn with elders, like what are the important things that we need to learn from young people, right? Like what is their perspective that we're not listening to that can really help us in this moment? Or where can we look to our elders, right, to gain their wisdom? How do we pull both of these in, understanding the benefits of each of them in a way that can really support us as we move forward? So when you're thinking about this, right, like just being real with yourself in moments when you're feeling that sense of like, I just have to break free, like I'm just feeling like I cannot do this possibly any longer, right? Understanding, okay, is that impulse coming from this kind of like rebellious energy that's not necessarily in service of your future, or is it coming from something that you really could look to and be like, this is actually a freedom that I'm not allowing myself in my life right now, and really kind of leaning in more to that new energy, right, that Uranus is trying to bring for you, or in other moments where that Saturn energy in your birth chart is trying to like ground you again and this bring you back to reality in a little bit of a way, right, and be like, hey, but remember the consequences, right? Saturn is always trying to remind us of the consequences of our action, and that's what Saturn transits really do, is pull us back into that awareness, especially when we have like our Saturn return and things like that. So Saturn wants us to be in that space of practicality and to remember, yes, but you know, what does this mean in terms of like 5 years from now? So if we can find a way, if you're having this transit, to just come back again and again into a place of like listening to both sides fully, and through that push and pull, find some sort of dynamic way to allow yourself to contain both at the same time, which is very challenging. But I think that's kind of like the way forward in this situation. So with that, we're going to end all of this. Thank you so much for watching today, and hopefully I'll see y'all in another video. And again, I just want to remind everybody about my class, By the Moon, the Intuitive Guide to Understanding Your Birth Chart. All the information is in the description box. And again, this is one, there's a free ebook right now that I have that has the entire first lesson in it, along with a video tutorial. So if you want to get a taste of what is in the class and are curious about it, you can go ahead and get that free ebook for now. And actually through July, I'm also giving my entire resource guide, The Planets, an Archetypal Guide, is coming along free if you purchase the class in July. So anyways, go and check it out. Thank you again for being here, and I'll see y'all in another video. Bye.